Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's NFCA webinar presented by Rapsodo. We are going to be exploring nutrition and eating disorders, from recognition to conversations. This topic is huge in athletics, specifically for sports that have female participants, and we know as coaches it can be very difficult to navigate the landscape of nutrition and eating disorders with your team. Whether you're coaching 10 and under or all the way through professional and Olympic ranks, this probably will come into play sometime for you in your career. And here at the NFCA, we want to provide education at every turn. We are proud to bring you a group of panelists that include industry experts and well-known coaches. We think that the information provided will be a resource that you can use from now until you meet with your team again. Hopefully you get a lot out of this. We're really excited to introduce you to the panelists. Let's take it away.
I am so delighted to be with you all today. Thank you for tuning in. This is a topic that is very near and dear to my heart. It's going to be hard to contain myself in time. I'll try. I really scaled back the talk on what I had just done with the American coaches and customize it for softball, really provide you with lots of resources. You will have access to a PDF version of this, as well as a couple of a great resource for softball nutrition, specifically my contact information on the slide, as well as the link to my laboratory at Boston University. And among the different tabs on my web, there's one specific to eating disorder. So any of the papers that I've published in this talk are accessible there. Again, links to great resource blog posts. So I really want this conversational. I'm really looking forward to the panel discussion and hearing from the perspectives of others on the panel. And these are sort of objectives for today. I want to talk about this situation called relative energy deficiency in sport, because I care a lot about this as a dietitian, and I want you all to care about this as coaches for your athletes. So we'll start off by talking about that. Try to give you some insights into how do we know who might be at risk for eating disorders or disordered eating, what we can do as coaches, and how we can really support our athletes. And a lot of that, again, has to do with sharing resources and educating ourselves, which are all making time to do today. So nutrition is so foundational for athletes, right? It's going to impact all of the goals that they're trying to achieve in sport. It's going to make them stronger, faster, more likely to recover from an injury. Maybe it will help with injury prevention for sure. So there's many, many things that nutrition, we want it to be as high on the priority list for a student athlete as is their training and their skills development for their sport. So I want to talk about this one in particular today, how the nutritional needs athlete are increased. Most of you probably are collegiate, but there might be some high school coaches or even programs. If you have development needs on top of it, if you're talking about an adult, then needs, with sport top are even more magnified. So, athletes need to understand performance nutrition, and, there are no shortcuts to sports nutrition. There's no magical potion. It's not a mystery, it's not rocket science, but it's really, really important. And athletes need the tools to understand how they need to prioritize feeding themselves. And I use the phrase of being a competent eater, to learn how to plan and prepare and have great foods available and to know basic nutritional requirements. And so this means, giving access to accurate information. And hopefully some of you have dietitians in your athletics programs, in your sports medicine programs. But if you don't, there's at the end of this presentation on how to find a registered dietitian in your area, because we really do need to get education out there and expose our athletes to really credible information, because athletes need to have a plan, right? That's the thing. Sports nutrition is hard work. It doesn't just come easily. You have to plan and prepare. And I'm talking a hydration plan, a fueling strategy, and helping athletes understand nutrient timing so they know about nutrition before, after, hitting that recovery window. They also need to know that they should be getting most of their nutrition from food and not from supplements, because supplements are supplemental. They are not the foundation of sports nutrition. So I want to talk about energy balance. In the simplest sense, we're obviously trying to achieve an energy intake and an adequate diet that matches and meets our needs for how much energy we're expending in sport, but in everyday life. And the problem is this can get out of whack really quickly and very easily, because to start with, we all have some resting metabolic needs, right? Our heart is pumping, our lungs are breathing, our hair is growing, our GI tract is moving. So we have the physiological needs every day. Then we have our activities of daily living. We get up out of bed in the morning, we get dressed, or we take a shower first. We make ourselves, hopefully something to eat. We get some nutrition coming in, some energy intake and some hydration. But as we go through our day, we're burning more energy. We have to get around campus. We might be bicycling or walking between classes or around campus. We have practice in games, right? At the end of the day or on the weekends, we're training, we're competing, more and more energy expenditure. We all know that we have athletes who overtrain, right? They're training in addition. Sometimes they're even training when they're injured and they're supposed to be taking time off. Then we have, very active lifestyles. We're doing things with our friends. We're playing a pickup game of basketball. We're out on the green playing Frisbee, whatever we're doing, to be active and have fun. Then we have athletes who have injuries, who are healing and trying to recover, either from an injury, and it could be something like a concussion, or it could be from a surgical intervention when they're trying to repair a wound or heal a broken bone. So you can see how the right side of this equation can get so magnified that if an athlete is not purposely fueling and really knowing how to feed themselves to meet all these energy needs from expenditure, they can get in a situation called low energy availability. And that just means that there's a mismatch. There's not enough fuel coming in relative to the fuel that they are expending. And so up until about 6 years ago, this situation was described as the female athlete triad. And those of you who have been in coaching for a long time have probably heard of this. And it's this triangle on the left part of the slide where we have this low energy availability situation, which can be caused by restrictive eating and dieting, or disordered eating, or a full-blown eating disorder. But this can happen in the absence of an eating disorder. And that's why it's so important for you guys to understand that we're not just talking about when someone has a clinically diagnosed eating disorder. This can happen quickly and it can happen fairly easily. So what happens in the female athlete triad is the low energy availability affects the hormone balance, and in a female, she will lose her period. That's called amenorrhea, and that hormonal imbalance causes the bones to suffer. And so the deterioration of the architecture of the bone and the low quality bone density, clinically diagnosed osteoporosis that can happen in a 19 or a 20-year-old. I'm not just talking about later in life, but these can be career-ending situations of osteopenia or repeated stress fractures that could end someone's career. In 2014, the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, redefined the female athlete triad into a much more broad syndrome called REDS, Relative Energy Deficiency in Sport. And what you see on the diagram on the right part of the slide is the recognition that this is not just about menstrual cycles and bone health. That's the little purple triangle, but that REDS actually affects every single organ system in the body. So it affects the cardiovascular system, the GI tract, immunity, the endocrine system, so additional hormones. It affects metabolism, anemia, that's the hematologic indices, certainly growth and development. So again, if we are talking about an adolescent who hasn't reached their peak bone mass and their peak adult height, you can imagine how devastating these consequences can be in a youth or adolescent athlete. The one I want to point out, you see the bold red arrow on the psychological factors, because this is the one part of the RED syndrome where the arrow is double-headed. So most of these other things, REDS causes those manifestations to the organ systems in a damaging way. Psychology predisposes you to ring red. So you have an athlete who has anxiety, depression, OCD, bipolar, has a traumatic event, right? A date rape, some trauma in their life. That predisposes them to this relative energy deficiency syndrome. But as REDS worsens, the psychological well-being worsens and deteriorates further. And so what happens is that the restrictive eating, the compulsive exercising, all of the disordered behaviors become more rigid and entrenched. And so it it makes the eating disorder risk escalate wildly. So psychological well-being is a really big risk factor, and something that we may be able to recognize as coaches if we're paying attention to our athletes' moods and, you know, sort of how they are when they show up for practice, for example. But this is the part that usually gets the athlete's attention, and oftentimes coaches, is that red sabotages the exact things that coaches and athletes care about, which is performance, because it's going to affect every single desired outcome, whether it's muscle strength or endurance or preventing injury or having a very efficient response to training where you're actually gaining the progress you anticipate from how hard you're training, as well as things like coordination and mental clarity. These are the skills that your players need on the field and in the game to be sharp and make instantaneous decisions and get that ball, you know, from the outfield to the infield quickly, the reaction time. So reds is going to compromise all of the things that we're actually trying to achieve in sport. So how do we know who might be at risk or who might be affected? There's kind of a laundry list of things that could catch your attention on this slide. Many of you probably know the story of Mary Kane and her experience as a runner with the Nike Oregon project, which was a really unfortunate situation that hit the news in a big time this past year. And that's a really extreme case. But my point is to say that, first of all, this doesn't happen just to runners, and we don't want to wait for extreme circumstances before we intervene. And that's really what happened in Mary Kane's situation, where she really had to completely leave the training environment. And for some people, they have to leave their sport altogether because it just gets so toxic psychologically and damaging, you know, physically to their bodies. So any athlete who's training and competing at a high level is at risk. So those are the athletes that you are coaching, right? There's a sort of, I'll say an outdated, I was going to say faulty belief, but it's sort of outdated belief that this only happens to athletes in, you know, aesthetic sports where they're judged, like figure skating or gymnastics, or weight-based sports like crew or wrestling, or like the lean sports like swimming, diving, and running. But the truth is no sport and no athlete is immune. This happens in every sport, regardless of a person's position, you know, on the team or the position that they play. Anybody who, and you'll recognize these characteristics in your athletes, right? They're driving to be the best athlete they can be. They're perfectionists. They're very critical of themselves. Sometimes, you know, coaches and parents are critical in ways trying to motivate their athletes, but it can really get into the psyche of an athlete and be a tipping point sometimes, especially for someone who doesn't have a lot of self-worth and isn't quite sure that they're going to make it on the team or they're going to get a spot in the starting lineup. So vulnerable athletes, LGBTQ individuals and LGBTQ athletes are at increased risk. When an athlete suffers an injury and can't train and is afraid that their body composition might change, for example, that's a high-risk group. And any athlete, like I said, with pre-existing mental health conditions, so if they are predisposed to anxiety disorders, or they have a component of depression, or again, those things that get worsened when they get injured. Any athlete who's not performing, you know, where they think they should be, or they're on the bench and they want to be on the field, right? We have different types of body ideals that athletes pursue. Some are after the thin ideal, others are after the more muscular ideal. But regardless, those who have a very strong athlete identity and don't really know, like, who am I outside of my sport? People who are compulsively exercising and overtraining. And then again, people who just don't have the skills, you know, for feeding themselves. And these are skills that we usually develop as children in our parents' household. But we can, you know, some people show up at college and they've never developed eating competence. Others are competent eaters, but they lose it along the way because they fall into these traps of restrictive dieting, or, you know, sort of sometimes a culture of dieting within a team can strip someone of their eating competence because they think, oh, this is what's expected because everybody else on my team is dieting and eating this way. So these are some of the things that really should be getting your attention. So eating disorders are very multifactorial. There's no one specific cause. certainly there is a genetic predisposition, but it's where all these different circles come together to create the perfect storm, right? Some of it is our personal characteristics, and a lot of the things that make athletes very elite and competitive, and again, the ones who are likely to rise to collegiate and Olympic levels, those trait characteristics of somebody who's very coachable and very disciplined and committed and striving to be their best, those are also characteristics that get very caught up in eating disordered behavior. And so you can see why athletes might be at greater risk. There are cultural factors, some that predispose to eating disorders, others that might be more protective, and then of course the psychosocial well-being, but we can't ignore the environmental influences. So there's stuff, like I said, in the home environment. Food security is a major risk factor. There's things happening on college campuses, inside athletic departments, sometimes within specific sports teams where there's a certain culture around dieting and body shaming, or again, more supportive around acceptance in body diversity. So it could be on either side of the coin. We know for sure that the social cultural messages around women's bodies are pretty toxic, and promoting a dieting culture and promoting a culture of comparisons through social media that fuels eating disorders. And as I mentioned, we have to pay attention to where trauma exists, because that can be a real tipping point. So what do we know from the literature? Well, we know that for female athletes, a major driving force of eating disorder onset has to do with the desire to be the best as they can at their sport, but a lot of times that's conflated with the idea that they need to lose weight or have a certain body shape or size. And another major trigger is, again, the negative emotions, especially if they miss training. So again, think of your athlete who gets injured and isn't training with their team, and they become depressed and anxious about that. Work that we've done is on the right part of the slide, showing all of these other, sources of pressures, role modeling behavior by teammates, which is why, again, the culture that is on your team can either support or can endorse disordered behaviors. And so I see this as a major role for coaches to have an influence there. So I want to make sure that you're not fooled by stereotypes. Some people think that eating disorders only happen, again, in certain sports where, the athlete is judged on how they look doing their sport, as well as their skill set, and where there's weight classes like I mentioned in crew, or skimpy uniforms like in diving and volleyball. Some people think an eating disorder is only in a person in a smaller body, and when somebody looks emaciated, that's not true. Eating disorders come in all shapes and sizes, and a lot of people suffering with eating disorders are actually living in larger bodies. And so we don't want to dismiss risk or think that, we can see with our naked eye who might be struggling and who might not be, because it's really, that's a faulty belief system. So my approach is to take universal precautions, and basically to assume that every athlete on your team is particularly vulnerable and at risk. And so this is why we have to be really careful about what we say, what our body language conveys, how we're interacting with our athletes, how open the communication is, how clear we are in our expectations, because a lot of the cornerstone of eating disorders is dysfunctional communication, and where an athlete thinks because a coach said something that they really meant something else, and this sort of interpretation without having the communication skills to say, Coach, I'm not sure what you're saying. Can you tell me more about what you just meant by that? And so a lot of the treatment and therapy is building up communication skills, for example. So these are just some tips about, we don't want to step on a landmine, because oftentimes coaches are very well intentioned in how they're motivating their players, but they may say something that an athlete interprets completely off base, and it could be a tipping point for someone who's vulnerable. So, what can we do as coaches? One thing is to know where your athletes are getting nutrition information, and you can be, an influencer in that regard, because there are so many things out there that are influencing our athletes, like on Instagram, on social media, in magazines. There are supplements and muscle builders and all sorts of products targeted at athletes that are just looking for their money to build these multi-billion-dollar supplement industries. And again, athletes are much more likely to take nutrition advice from people that they trust. So teammates, friends, coaches, strength coaches. And so if you don't have a registered dietitian in your athletics program, where are athletes going to get credible information? So some of the things I like to promote is, again, if you don't have your own sports dietitian, these are some of my favorites that I recommend for high school athletes to follow, or collegiate athletes if they don't have a dietitian on their campus, because they're pumping out really great content. So if they're going to follow someone on social media, it might as well be a registered dietitian who's a certified specialist in sports dietetics. There are also great websites. So the Olympic Nutrition, Team USA has great handouts for what an athlete's training plate should look like. The CPSDA is the Collegiate and Professional Sports Dietitians Association. Fantastic download. I'm going to show you some of their resources in a minute. NCAA has an Institute on Nutrition, Sleep, and Performance. And then the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics is for registered dietitians, but puts out information for consumers. And so they have a whole section on sports and performance with tips for athletes. So, these can be your go-tos as to where you suggest your athletes get more details. So CPSDA has a great series of sports-specific brochures, and I sent this one to Joanna. It's like a 4 or 5 page, very customized exactly for your athletes, addressing in-season versus off-season and all of the information that your athletes will need to become competent eaters for their sport. CPSDA, here's another one of the infographics specifically for an athlete who's injured about the importance of nutrition for return to play. And then here's an example of something from the NCAA. If one of your athletes decides they want to be vegetarian, how do you do that and still meet your super high nutritional needs without compromising and being too restrictive such that you're going to, compromise your performance? So great resources out there. I like to share this little vignette. This is from an athlete that I worked with over a period of 6 years who recovered from an eating disorder. And I asked this athlete, what were the top 3 challenges you had to overcome to beat your eating disorder that was related to sport? And these were the 3 messages. So I had to stop believing that weight was the measure of success, failure, and my self-worth. I had to abandon the rigid and restrictive, what we call high commitment eating, the perfect eating, the perfect nutritional plan for the athlete, with a hyper focus on dieting and weight as believed to be the keys to performance. And I had to stop the constant comparison to others. So coaches can help with every single one of these things. What can coaches do? First of all, we can focus on performance, not on weight. Okay, we need to avoid any languages, actions, or cultures that endorse the mindset that weight is a measure of an athlete's success or failure or their worth on our team. What can we do to counteract this high commitment eating? We need to role model eating competence, and we need to promote adequacy, nutritional adequacy, getting back to the energy balance and the prioritizing fueling and the commitment to adequate nutrition for sport. And we can avoid being judgmental of what people eat and know that all foods fit into a healthy pattern of eating. So if you see an athlete having a cookie at the tailgate after the game, let it go. It's not a big deal. Don't make a comment, right? It's just one food choice in a myriad of choices over the day. And we can stress the importance of other things. It's not just about diet, but proper fueling, hydration, sleep, taking a day off and a rest day, addressing REDs when you are concerned about it, addressing overtraining and making sure that that's appropriate. And when you see injured athletes training when they're not supposed to be, reinforcing the importance of compliance with the rehab protocols. And then addressing social media use and making sure that in our languages and actions, we're not comparing athletes and that we are embracing body diversity. This is a great sheet from the CPSDA, also to help you as a coach, to make sure you're not stepping on a landmine and saying something, again, well-intentioned. An athlete has lost some weight in the off season and they come back looking stronger than ever. Rather than saying, you look great, you've lost weight, you might comment on, wow, you're looking really strong. I noticed how well you did in batting practice today, right? Focus on the strength, focus on their power, not on their weight or the shape or size of their body. So there's lots of little examples of things that we might normally say because it just rolls off our tongue, but how we could rephrase that in a way that would be much more supportive and very clear to the athlete what we mean when we're trying to communicate something. So I think this is a really useful. But other ways you can educate yourself, I mean, my go-to sports nutrition book is Nancy Clark's Sports Nutrition Guidebook. Again, she's a registered dietitian. You see the RD credential. I buy this for any high school athlete that's going off to play collegiate athletics. I think every coach and athlete should have it on their bookshelf. The middle book is a new one that just came out this past year. Rebecca McConville also is a registered dietitian. She's got the CSSD, the Sports Dietetics credential, and the CEDRD, means she's a certified eating disorder dietitian. This book is all about REDs and avoiding REDs. It's an easy read. It's not a very thick book. Your athletes can read it. Parents of adolescent athletes should read it. Coaches should read it. And it really describes the physiologic changes to all the different organ systems. And it really motivates you to avoid these syndromes at all costs by talking about the performance impact. And then this is a podcast that I did with one of my colleagues about the hidden truths of clean eating, because that's where a lot of this starts. It's very well intentioned. Athletes are trying to do the advice that they hear on social media, or that's, advised to them about clean eating and, going vegetarian or vegan, all with the hope of improving their performance, but how it can be a very slippery slope to an eating disorder and to the situation of REDs in an athlete. There's a great toolkit for you from the National Eating Disorders Association, specifically for coaches and trainers, and it's got I showed you the table of contents here, in addition to all the information that you'd want to know about all the different diagnoses and warning signs and, what can I do as a coach, but the personal stories from the perspective of athletes and coaches and nutritionists, I think are very, very compelling. So how can we support? First and foremost, address it and do not ignore it, okay? Ignoring behaviors of concern is just going to allow them to fester, and they will spread throughout your team like wildfire, because people pay attention to what their teammates are doing, and these behaviors can be role modeled. So you want to have private conversations, calm conversations. Expect the athlete to be in denial and to deny that there's any problem. They'll tell you they've got this under control, they know what they're doing. Make sure they're connected to a registered dietitian and or a therapist or counselor. Be as supportive as you can and keep the door open for them to talk with you, because now they know that you care and that you've noticed, because what you want to do is stick to the facts of what you're observing. You certainly don't want to diagnose them and say, I think you have an eating disorder, but you can say things like, I noticed that you've really been running out of energy at practice, or, I've noticed that you seem to your mood seems to be down when you show up for practice, or you seem to have difficulty concentrating. What's going on? And just allow an opportunity for conversation. So you definitely don't want to leave it unaddressed. There's a lot on this slide just to remind us that we need to get educated. We need to screen, hopefully working with our athletic trainers on pre-participation physicals. But remember those tipping points, like when an athlete gets injured, for example, to have this as an elevated need on your radar screen, and then how to refer. And just to remember the seriousness. I'm not going to read everything on the slide, but these are just sort of my take-home messages in terms of some of the sound bites. And this is what we do at BU, because addressing eating concerns, it's a multidisciplinary responsibility. We all have a role in this. Again, you may or may not have sports psychology and sports nutrition at your fingertips. In the high school setting, you may only have an athletic trainer and other coaches, but there should at least be a school, like a guidance counselor or a school counselor. And, athletes, they have their eyes open too, and they will come and talk to you about teammates that they're concerned about. So the more you can keep an open culture and put infrastructure in place to communicate and identify the concerns, then you're in a better position to act. So this is my last slide, just reminding us that you have a tremendous power and also responsibility as a coach to set the team culture, and nutrition can be an important part of that. And, hopefully these tips will be really useful. There's some additional resources, again, in this handout, including like how to find a registered dietitian by Googling in your zip code on a search engine, and just making sure that you surround yourself with the education and the people who can contribute.
Whew. Paula, take a breath. That was fantastic. I know
A
that
lot
was
of information.
well, it's a great information. Thank you so much. And
Sure.
I'm not even coaching a team right now, and I'm all kinds of taking notes over here of just great things to know. So thank you very much for
Sure.
giving that to us. And have some really good questions coming in on the chat. So make sure you put your own in there. Yes, you will have a resource packet coming to you regarding the presentation and links and all of that after the fact. So watch your email. We will get you all of those details. Right now, we're going to go around and have our other panelists introduce themselves, give you a little bit of information on where they're coming from and their backgrounds, and then we'll get into these questions. So Coach Joe Evans, Texas A&M, you want to go first?
Sure. I'm Joe Evans, head coach at A&M. I've been head coaching now for 35 years. So I've actually had some, experiences with some eating disorders, disordered eating. I'm certainly not an expert by any means, and I've learned a lot along the way. So the presentation was terrific. I love the resources, and I'm excited to kind of delve into some of the information you've given us. So thanks, Paula.
Thank you.
Thank you, Coach Evans. Coach Frost, Melissa Frost, University of Indianapolis. You want to go next?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Melissa Frost, University of Indianapolis. I've been the head coach here for 17 years. My background is athletic training and health education. So I have been on both sides of the fence of helping young ladies that have shown signs of eating disorders, whether it be from athletic training perspective or a coaching perspective. But Paula, fantastic presentation. I jotted down a lot of notes. I think my hand's cramping from writing so much. So thank you for the information.
Thank you, Coach Frost. And Caroline McConnell. Caroline, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I also just wanted to say, Paula, that was great presentation. I think you really hit the nail on the head with a lot of the just the possible triggers and risk factors and things like that. I am a former softball player for Central Michigan University. I graduated in 2016, and I also just finished my master's degree in counseling this past May. And I'm really passionate about mental health and how it impacts student athletes, just being there. And, I've got a personal connection with this topic as well. I was always really driven to succeed, mix that with a complicated relationship with food and injuries, other triggers that resulted in some patterns of disordered eating on and off throughout my 5 years there. I was a shortstop, prided myself to be able to get to balls I wasn't supposed to, and sometimes you miss one and you're ruminating and staring at the spot and like, oh, if I was only 5 pounds lighter. And I think that's how some of that is bred in drivenness to succeed as well. And just real quick, I just wanted to touch on the communication piece that Paula mentioned, because I think that's really important. And, there's a lot of complexities with this as it relates to the student athlete's relationship with coaches, other staff members, teammates, just because there's a lot at play, especially college on the college level. It's a business as well as, you have relationships with the players. And I think the biggest piece that's important regarding communication is just having constant communication, destigmatizing it, and creating space, whether it's athlete to athlete, coach to athlete, trainer to athlete, and that safe space. In counseling, we want to create a safe space for people to be able to share difficult things, and that looks like empathy, not sympathy, but validating somebody's struggles, even if it seems dramatic or strange or you don't understand. Then the second piece is just like unconditional positive regard of, I'm not going to judge you no matter what you're saying. I'm here to support you, and I'm not going to endorse these behaviors, but you're safe. You can share. And then lastly, just genuineness of we're both humans, regardless of who the athlete is talking to. Connecting on that human level, I think, helps create that safety as well as just patience, because it's a difficult, sensitive topic. It's a hard thing to talk about, and it's going to be messy. And I think when coaches and players and other staff members are willing to step into the mess together, I think that's where people will be able to work through it. So
Carol Ann, thank you. I appreciate that, and you. And there's a lot of questions, a lot of great information. So we're going to get into these. Panelists, if the question is not directed at you, but you want to jump in, please feel free. This is collaboration at its finest, so don't worry about stepping on anybody's toes. Jump on in. First question is from the chat. How do I address a concern from a couple of other players about their teammate? Concern seems to be stemming from seeing Instagram pictures where it looks like the teammate has lost too much weight. During our shortened season, there was also concern. So Paula, I'll start with you, and then we'll come to everybody on this one.
Yeah, I think you want to take that very seriously. And I think you want to, sometimes it might be hard depending on like some, competitiveness between teammates and, people, you have to make sure that it's really done from genuine concern, right? So I think, maybe even asking to see the post, because you do want to validate and make sure that you're getting accurate and honest reports. I think I would first, as a coach, want to talk with, if I had a sports psychologist or a mental health counselor to discuss it with, and because I think you want to figure out who is the best person to raise this with the athlete. It might be the athletic trainer, it might be an assistant coach and not the head coach, because a lot depends on the dynamics of the trusted relationships, because there is that power and authority of a head coach that could make the conversations much more difficult than if it came from whoever that athlete has a really solid relationship. I've also had a coach come to me and say, I'm concerned about this athlete. I don't want to have this conversation by myself. And so she and I and the sports psychologist all sat down with this athlete together. So I think, you want to make sure you're not ganging up on the person. But again, if you let them know, like, us three individuals would like to have a meeting with you so that they know what they're, sort of walking into, and you don't want to sort of surprise them with too many people in one room. But so you want to be very thoughtful about it, and you want to take those concerns very seriously, get as much information from the teammates about what they've observed and what they're concerned about, and then try to, again, validate that with your other coaches and the other members of sports medicine to get other pieces of information of what others have noticed, to really try to get as comprehensive assessment, I would say, before you bring that to the athlete. Not that you want to kitchen sink them by throwing so much information, but I think you want to have a complete picture and not act just on like one isolated report. But you do want to address it and certainly not dismiss it, because it won't go away.
Thank you, Paula. Coach Evans, your take on this situation and something that maybe you've done in the past or plan to do in the future.
Yeah, I think what's really important with everything we do is making sure we don't cause drama. That as coaches, I don't care what the situation is, we have to make sure we protect everybody. So these teammates who come to us with this concern, they cannot then be involved in this. Their names can't be brought up. As coaches, we have to find ways to navigate challenging situations in order to protect everyone. Otherwise, you get a really toxic dynamic on your team. So I would just say, when these things have come up, because I have had players bring these things to my attention, I think of that all the time. No matter if it's an eating disorder or something else, how can I navigate this and communicate and have our players have no idea that this didn't come from anybody but me and my own observations. So as a coach, I'm not here to be the expert on the counseling piece or the nutrition piece, but that it's so critical that we pay attention to that piece. And I think it's important in every single thing we do. There are teams that have a lot of drama, and coaches might think it's because their kids are just dramatic, but a lot of times we have to look at ourselves and understand we could possibly be complicit and we have something to do with this.
Thank you, Coach Evans. Coach Frost, your take.
I couldn't agree with Coach Evans more. I think the biggest piece is having that open communication with the team members and taking what they're telling you very, very seriously. That's in the couple cases that I've had as a coach, that is exactly how it's happened. I've had players come into my office concerned about another player, I spend a lot of time observing, and then, you know, behind the scenes, getting with our athletic trainer, getting with the counselor, getting with the appropriate people on campus. And then once I actually had the opportunity to sit down with the player, I think the biggest thing for me was letting her know, and I think that Carol Ann hit it on the head, that I'm not judging you. This is a safe space, but we're not going to endorse this behavior. And let's you and I, if I can walk this walk with you, help you figure this out together, and allow yourself to be vulnerable that you're not the expert in this, you know, and this will be a journey that you will take with the young lady as she goes through it. And I think that's big, because I think once the athlete understands how much that you care, you observe, and it's really about the big picture of their life, then I think they're much more willing and open. And but I think if you can do the work on the back end and get some things set up for them, and I've already reached out to the counselor, the dietitian, anybody else that's on campus, I think that's crucial.
Thank you. Carol Ann, how about you? When you think about this situation, and you know, whether it's from a student athlete perspective or the counseling perspective of how to start the conversation, what advice would you give to a coach?
Yeah, I think just, you know, gathering information is really important. Like Missy and Coach Evans and everyone was saying, that's important. And I also really liked what Missy said about just being willing to walk it with them. I think even in some of my own conversations with staff and things, we talked about it once and then it was awkward and like it was never talked about again. And just being willing to have little conversations and check in and know that for the athlete to know they're not alone and that like they have support, I think.
Thank you. And a question to follow up is advice on how to navigate during this time when you won't see the athlete again until August. Is there something that coach should be doing right now? Paula, any insights there?
Yeah, I mean, I think what Carolyn was just saying is so important with regards to not allowing the athlete to feel isolated or like they are on their own and separated from their team, you know, especially if someone is in treatment. So I think keeping that communication, checking in with them frequently, letting them know that you care and expressing your concern and checking in, you know, how is it going, especially if an athlete is in treatment, for example. This is a great time for them to be getting support. You know, and using this time really effectively before they come back to campus and restore their training and competition. And so I can't emphasize enough, because we've heard this in our research with qualitative interviews, athletes saying what a relief it was when they finally were able to share with their coach and hear from the coach how concerned they were and how much they cared. It was such a compassionate exchange that it motivated them to do the work in treatment and to recover and to return to sport, because otherwise, you know, the isolation just gets magnified and the gap between the athlete and their teammates gets bigger and bigger. And when we don't communicate about it, it becomes stigmatized. And so, you know, normalizing it in the sense of like, this happens, and it happens to athletes at high rates, and we're here to support you. And I think as Missy said, with regards to having a plan of the referrals, like these are the people who are going to be the key players to support you, and making sure that that athlete is connected to the right treatment team, whether it's through an eating concerns team or a team of outpatient providers, because you need somebody really managing that case and making sure that there's, you know, going to be adherence to that. And the coach can, you know, be as involved or as the athlete allows with regards to keeping them updated on the progress, and just really letting them know that they care about how the treatment's going and that they're moving forward.
Thank you. Another question from the chat is on handling your student athletes and trends and fad diets and eating plans. So this one is specifically concerning intermittent fasting. And so Paula, I'll let you talk to that specifically. And then Coach Frost, Coach Evans, if you could speak on the education piece for your teams. Is this something that you incorporate early on, often? Who does that education? How do you plan it? What are the details there? So Paula, let's start with you on specifically with intermittent fasting, what people should be aware of.
Yeah, I mean, dieting is a precursor to eating disorders. And so I don't care what you call it, keto keto, intermittent fasting, whatever, it really does not play a role in competitive sport, and especially for, again, female athletes who are still a 19-year-old freshman coming onto a team, right? They don't even hit their peak bone mass until they're about 30. And so we have to worry about nutritional adequacy, and we have to worry about this low energy availability. So fasting is the opposite of proper fueling and nutrient timing for sport. It's particularly dangerous to do it when you're in competitive season. I mean, sometimes athletes will work on their body composition changes in the off season. Again, please do it under the expert guidance of a registered dietitian, because athletes adopting these things from social media or wherever they're getting their information, there's no expert on the case following them, and somebody can get into trouble really quickly. I mean, the main hockey coach was telling me about one of his male hockey players who, was at home training in the summer, and his strength coach at the gym basically put him on a keto diet, and the athlete came back so depleted, with all sorts of disordered eating, and started having all kinds of injuries. Like, it happens quickly. And so we have to make sure that if somebody is going to try some of these diets, that they are really getting a full evaluation and an assessment by a registered dietitian, who can also is seeing them weekly to monitor when things are starting to go awry, because people get into trouble when it's not supervised.
Thank you. Coach Evans, how do you approach this with your team and education, and what have you found to be helpful?
Well, first I want to acknowledge that I come from a place of privilege at Texas A&M. So we have access to full-time nutritionists, which I understand a lot of people on this call do not. And I've also been in your shoes in my earlier years of coaching that we didn't have access. So at those times, I was reaching out to the college of nutrition, going to our resources at our universities and asking PhD students, are you interested in talking to our team? So, it is easier for me having somebody right there with what we do. And I will say this, I think in all the facets of our program, this has been the weakest area for our program. I feel like it's the last thing for us to really implement and mesh into our culture. It's been a challenging thing where, we're the weight room we're getting great at, the extra hitting in the cages, all these things, even the psychologists involving them. But this nutrition piece, I find to be so tricky and so challenging because it's so different for everybody, and we all have to eat. And so there's just these challenges that we face. And so I've tried really hard to make it be about fueling your body. How strong, how powerful are you? I mean, these things are all a way to say, are we taking care of the nutrition piece? But we have a nutritionist who has done a really great job of educating. Here's what I've learned from the trial and error. Long presentations, coming in with a big PowerPoint for student athletes. Now, today's PowerPoint knocked it out of the park. Love it. I'm talking about student athletes who are mowing and going. That didn't work. We've now done really short snippets. Our nutritionist, she comes in for just like at the beginning of practice, we're all just hanging out and talking in the dugout. Hey, I just want to talk to you guys about hydration. Hydration is a big part of this, and we don't talk about it enough. If you can get the hydration piece, you're kind of on your way to really starting to figure things out. So that's a big piece of it. She'll come in every couple weeks and just pick a topic, but have it be simple, something they can easily digest and learn and move through. Also, she's done a good job of just placing a little bullet point on the fridge in the player lounge or on a locker or wherever it may be, just as that reminder. The things about, here are the things that are great before practice. These are the quick things you might need before practice. These are the things after practice for recovery. I didn't know any of that stuff when I played or as a coach. So I'm learning a lot along the way. So those are things that have been really valuable. It's not that hard to do. If you don't have a nutritionist, you now have Paula, can be your go-to. You have access to people who can say, yep, this is the perfect thing that you can just paste right there, and they can see it, and it gets to be something, you know, that they're used to seeing. We have the luxury also of doing hydration testing, and that's been really cool because our players have no idea how dehydrated they are. So we do that I think it's every couple weeks we do that, and that's really telling. And so then we can make sure we're taking care of that. And so those are the main things we've done with the nutrition thing. And then the other thing I want to say is here's what I've learned, and I started to know this about everything with our kids, is that if they don't really develop a relationship with this nutritionist, if this nutritionist doesn't come hang out at the ballpark, it makes it tougher. So we had a situation where there was a nutritionist more kind of hands off a little bit, not as much interested in actually cultivating a relationship and knowing these people. Because food, as I've said, and we know, is kind of can be a delicate thing. So the fact that the nutritionist now is like, no softball, she's hanging out in the dugout, not talking about nutrition, coming to the games, being around us, helping with pregame meals. But anyway, I think that's been really helpful too, because if you don't have a relationship that's real and authentic, they're not going to have these difficult conversations.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. I always say, if you're not on the inside, you're on the outside, and we have to be inside athletics, and we have to go and meet the athletes where they are. We have to be accessible with our doors open so that they can walk in and or be at the fueling station if you're lucky enough to have one, right? It's those casual interactions and that authentic relationship that we become a trusted insider so that we're there when they need us. And that's the problem with so many athletics programs not having dietitians on staff, or if you hire the wrong person and they don't make those personal connections, because the one and done come in and give a lecture really is just information overload, and there's no skills building or, you know, that's going to come out of that. And it's all about the relationships. Beautifully said.
Thank you. Coach Frost, how about you? What's the approach that you take with your team and some things that you've done that have been successful?
We just recently partnered with Community Hospital, and this is our first year with a nutritionist on staff. So it's been very valuable for us from that perspective. But to speak on what Paula was just talking about, we heard her speak one time, and she was 8.5 months pregnant at that point. So then you can see where I'm going with this. She had a baby and was on maternity leave for a while. So then I feel like that is where we as coaches have to step in, continual reminders. It was hot out today at practice. Make sure we're plenty of water, you know, just maybe go through a list of things that are available in the calf, because I think that's probably one of the biggest things. The questions that our young ladies have is, you know, I feel like I'm getting tired, you know, at this certain point in practice, what else do I need to be eating? Or what else can I be doing? And so we kind of help them go through a little bit of a checklist of things that will help them, that are realistic to working and sustaining at that high rate that they want to work at. So I combine now with our nutritionist, our strength and conditioning coach, our athletic trainer, you know, and ask them certain times of the year, what do I need to be, kind of what message do I need to be making sure that I'm sending? And I think that's a big one. I know that Paula mentioned about the book earlier, Nancy Clark's book earlier. It's a fantastic resource. It's one that I have used, but certainly I think any information you get, make sure you consult that professional first.
Thank you. Carol-Ann, from your perspective, what are some of the more applicable things that coaches can do? I've been places where they do a nutritionist takes the team grocery shopping, how to read a label, or a cooking class, or you hear of all these different things. Are there things in your mind that would be really beneficial for student athletes?
That's tough. I think the more real and authentic it can all be, where it's not just like something we talk about, but maybe even something that the coaches participate in with the student athletes. Of course, it's a little bit different, you know, like the coaches don't need to fuel up for a game like the student athletes do. Although I know coaches that you need energy as well. It's just different. But I think participating and just joining in with the student athletes of like, hey, look at, you know, look what I got for dinner. Like, I don't know, things like that that make it relatable and like it's not just something we talk about but don't actually do, I think help.
Thank you. Any other ideas or anything you guys have done?
Joanna, if I can add one thing, I think we talk about and we meet with that nutritionist prior to taking any trip. So I think it's crucial that even though we talk about it, we have to put what that nutritionist is telling us into action. So I know that there's times when we look at the budget crunch, especially with everything happening now, that finances may be a little bit tighter next year, but I still think that those food choices that we make available to them on the road are crucial because then it also shows the athletes that we're investing in them, you know, and it's not just lip service that we get them to a nutritionist and here's what we need to be doing, but yet we're not going to supply any of these things to make it happen. So I think that's crucial to have a nutritionist or someone of a professional meet with them prior to taking any trip. So then they know what they can eat at 10 o'clock at night or, you know, pre-game, post-game, middle of the game, whatever it may be. And then obviously as coaches, I think we need to follow up on our due diligence to stay on top of that too.
An excellent point. And remember too that, you know, many universities, especially the large land grant universities, have nutrition programs where there are students and faculty in nutrition. And so you may not have a position funded in athletics, but you've got eager students and grad students who are dying for these opportunities to work with athletic teams. And you can forge a partnership, or maybe there's a local college or university that, again, student power or dietetic interns at local hospitals that are training to be nutrition professionals, they want to work in this niche of the field. And so partnerships can really bring some manpower to your campus.
I think we as coaches too, we obviously have a lot of control when we're on the road and what we're going to eat. And I understand that, you know, money is a factor, but I think the better job we coaches do of just pre-planning what this day is going to look like, or a lot of times we go back to the same places. So we know what restaurants we will go to. We already have a menu that we give to our student athletes, our nutritionists kind of highlights, hey, if you're wanting more protein or whatever it is, these are some really great choices for you to make. These are some choices that wouldn't be as great to make depending on what your situation is. So, and just, you know, if we don't want them to eat French fries and, you know, for lunch, then we don't pull into Wendy's. You know, I don't know the last time we went to a burger place to eat. So I think we have a lot to do with it. And I understand we have budget constraints. Sometimes it's expensive to eat healthy, but, you know, we've dropped our kids off at the grocery store in the, you know, food section where they have nice salad bar and things like that. And so I think it's really important for us to do our due diligence to help them be successful.
Thank you, Coach Evans. I know that we are running out of time here. I promised you an hour, a lot of great information. Just as a reminder, you will receive the slides. This specific recording will also be available in your coach's box, so you can get that at any point in time. And on the webinar page of our website, it's open to all, so share with the other coaches on your campus. We know that resources can be hard to come by, so please feel free to do that. You don't have to be logged in to see it. Any parting thoughts? I'm not going to call on anybody. I know that you might have some different things, but if you have any parting thoughts, please go ahead and throw them out. I see Paula, you came off of mute. Carol Ann came off mute. So feel free, whoever wants to go first, and give us what you're thinking.
I was just going to, I saw that Pam Fink asked about navigating the concerns from players on the chat. And I was just thinking about just trying to, especially if players are at home and not at school, trying to connect and figure out what resources might be in the players community and maybe trying to get connected with that and seeing how they could just get some support in that way. So that's all I wanted to say.
Good idea.
Awesome. No, I just wanted to say how impressed I am with how thoughtful you all are about the questions and the solutions and the strategies on your campus. It really is a team effort, and the more multidisciplinary we can be and the more we communicate with each other, the more we can help the student athletes. And I just love all the ideas that you shared, and it's just been such a pleasure to be with you today. I'm very, very grateful for the invitation to speak with you.
Thank you very much.
The last thing I would just say is just want to encourage all of us coaches to come up with a game plan and not wait until these things happen. When you have someone with disordered eating or an eating disorder, just, now's a good time when we have some extra time on our hands to start thinking about who's on our campus, who can help us. Because I know most people on this campus or on this call, we don't have all these resources that some of the Power 5 schools have. So start thinking about bringing those people in and coming up with your own team of a psychologist and your strength coach and your nutritionist and these extra resources so that when it comes, you're ready to go, you're armored. You're not going to be great at it. None of us are great at it, but you at least have an idea of some kind of a plan, and you're not caught on your heels, because when these things come to you, they're most often very serious, or can be, and you just don't want to feel overwhelmed.
I think just as coaches that we just need to continue staying diligent, getting to know our athletes, keeping that open environment, keeping the open environment of communication and creating a safe place. And I think when your athletes realize that you will not judge them, then they're going to be more willing to be forthcoming with you, truthful with you. And then at that point, then I think that we can help them get the help that's needed. And I think that that's crucial. They all say that they don't know how much you care until you really show them how much you do care. And I think that with a sensitive topic like this, I think Coach Evans hit it on the head earlier. We spend a lot of time with the lifting and the studying and the hitting and all these things. And I think that the nutrition piece has to be as big a cornerstone with developing your athletes as any other part of your program.
Thank you very much. And Coach Evans, Coach Frost, Paula, thank you so much. And cheesy coach moment here, but I coached Carol Ann for those 5 years at Central Michigan, and I'm just so proud of you. You're tremendous. And I'm going to say it out loud before we get off, even though I sent you a text. But thank you for sharing. You're welcome. And thank you for being you. If anyone has any questions, I promise these coaches and industry expert and Carol Ann, they will answer. So if you need to reach out to them, find their emails, contact us. I can put you in touch with Carol Ann if you need that. And just appreciate your time and your diligence in educating yourselves and taking care of your teams. I know there's a lot of things going on right now with some virtual recruiting and, maybe even trying to find some time for yourself. But thank you for being a part of our NFCA education. We are back tomorrow with mentoring. So if you need a little bit of one-on-one time, have some mentoring, have some questions, come join us. It is a tremendous event. It's a lot of fun, about 90 minutes, small breakout groups. It's a great time. So if you haven't been on one, join us. If you're already on one, you're probably coming back because they're great. Again, Carol Ann, Paula, Missy, Joe, thank you so much. And we will be back tomorrow for more. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.